What's wrong?
What?
Judith!
What's the matter?
Judith!
Welcome to Expressive Culture TV. In today's video, we're revisiting the 2013 film Temptation: Confessions of a Marriage Counselor, directed and written by Tyler Perry, adapted from his 2008 play, The Marriage Counselor. We'll cover critical components of the film from character development to the film's themes and messages conveyed. So kick back, relax, and let's delve into it together. Ready? Let's go. Temptation: Confessions of a Marriage Counselor revolves around the life of Judith, a marriage counselor played by Jurnee Smollett. The narrative unfolds within a framing device where Judith, in a counseling session, shares the story of her life with a young woman who's been having trouble in her marriage. This sets the stage for a flashback that explores the rise and fall of Judith's marriage and life. The flashback begins with Judith explaining how she fell in love and married her childhood sweetheart, Bryce, played by Lance Gross. The film then takes us to a then 25-and-a-half-year-old Judith, now living in DC with Bryce. Judith is disappointed with her life, primarily because her dream as a marriage counselor hasn't come to fruition by now as she expected it to. Not to mention her issues with Bryce and his lack of emotional or mental support towards her. Their time is spent mostly at their respective jobs, Judith working for a matchmaking agency while Bryce works as a pharmacist at a mom-and-pop pharmacy. The turning point comes with the introduction of Harley, a wealthy and charismatic entrepreneur. Harley is a millionaire who becomes Judith's client at the matchmaking agency where she works. Intrigued by his charm and lavish lifestyle, Judith finds herself drawn to Harley despite her initial reservations. As Judith becomes more involved with Harley, she starts to experience a glamorous lifestyle she never experienced with Bryce, including expensive gifts and luxurious trips. However, as Judith becomes more entangled with Harley, she begins to lose sight of her values and priorities. She neglects her marriage with Bryce, who becomes increasingly frustrated and hurt by her actions. Meanwhile, Harley reveals himself to be controlling and manipulative, ultimately leading Judith into a dark and abusive relationship. Amidst the chaos of her affair with Harley, Judith's life spirals out of control. She loses her job, her marriage crumbles, and she finds herself at rock bottom. Through a series of painful revelations and confrontations, she comes to understand the importance of love, commitment, and forgiveness. In the end, Judith must confront her own mistakes and attempts to save her broken marriage, while Bryce saves her before returning into Harley's home to punch him for hurting Judith. It's after this long flashback has ended that we find out that Judith and Bryce are no longer married and that he has moved on to a young pretty wife and a toddler son. The film serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of temptation and the fragility of relationships, ultimately emphasizing the importance of honesty, communication, and fidelity in marriage. Judith's character is deeply influenced by her upbringing under the guidance of her mother, Sarah. Throughout the film, it becomes evident that Judith's mom played a significant role in shaping her beliefs, values, and behaviors. Raised in a strict religious small town, Judith's mother instilled in her a sense of naivety and impressionability, leaving her ill-prepared to navigate the complexities of adult relationships. As a consequence, the sheltered upbringing left Judith with limited exposure to the outside world, leading her to view relationships and marriage through a narrow lens dictated by her mother's beliefs.
I don't believe in sex before marriage, so why would you need that?
Really?
It's not about where I'm from. It's called I'm a Christian. I was raised that way.
You need to be in church.
Get in the car.
Judith's marriage to Bryce also serves as a reflection of her mother's influence. Despite her desire to chase her dreams as a marriage counselor, Judith finds herself in a traditional marriage, placing her needs to the side to appease her husband. This dynamic is exemplified by Bryce's reluctance to meet Judith halfway in their marriage. as he fails to provide the emotional support and the encouragement she craves. But we'll speak more on this in a moment. In contrast and consequently, Judith's involvement with Harley stems from emotional vulnerability and loneliness, leading to her portrayal as the villain despite shared responsibility for her marriage's downfall. Which brings me to my second point. Let's talk about Bryce, who in my opinion isn't as innocent as he is made to be. While initially presented as Judith's respectable, kind husband and partner, Bryce's actions and behavior throughout the film reveal him to be a flawed and unsupportive spouse. He's known his wife his entire life, and yet his constant was being unreceptive to her wants and needs. Despite Judith's efforts to connect with him emotionally and physically, Bryce's reactions were aloof, naive, and selfish. This is shown numerous times from his neglect of important occasions, like forgetting Judith's birthday 2 years in a row and then offering that up with the lukewarm performance of Otis Redding's Try a Little Tenderness. How do you know someone your entire life and forget their birthday 2 years in a row? Furthermore, Bryce's lack of encouragement for Judith's aspirations, such as her desire to open her own marriage counseling business, highlights his selfishness and narrow-mindedness. Instead of supporting Judith's dreams and ambitions, Bryce imposes his own expectations and limitations on her, stifling her growth and potential.
Maybe I could get out of there and start my own practice.
Babe, that's a long ways off. I figure in about 10 to 15 years, we'll be established enough to take that chance. But right now, you don't need to be thinking about that.
10 to 15 years. Oh, great. That's encouraging. Thanks, baby.
He also has total disregard for his wife's boundaries. For instance, he violates her trust by divulging to Judith's mother that they sleep in on Sundays instead of going to church. This breach of privacy undermines Judith's autonomy and leaves her feeling justifiably betrayed and a lack of loyalty from Bryce. To make matters worse, when Judith confronts Bryce about his betrayal, Bryce gaslights her, feigning ignorance when she expresses disappointment, asking her, "What did he do now?" as if he has no awareness of his mistake. If that wasn't enough, he then asks if he needed to get out his guitar again, as if that was the end-all be-all. Throughout the film, Bryce's actions contribute to Judith's feelings of unhappiness in their marriage. One of the biggest moments of Bryce's downfall was him not defending Judith's honor during their date night when a group of men catcalled her, causing her to feel vulnerable, unprotected, and undervalued by Bryce. It makes one wonder why Bryce fought so hard to save the marriage in the first place. But despite all of this, Bryce is ultimately portrayed as a victim, while Judith bears the brunt of the blame for their marital issues. Now let's revisit Sarah, Judith's mother, for a moment. Sarah is also another highly flawed character, perceived as a do-gooder mother who loves her daughter unconditionally. And although that might be the case, throughout the film, Sarah is depicted as an overbearing presence in her daughter's life. This is evident in her efforts to keep Judith sheltered within their small town and church community, limiting her exposure to the outside world. This is even more apparent when she and a few of her church friends invite themselves into her daughter's home to pray the evil out of the place. On a side note, how did these women have time to fly or drive from their home to DC to do all of this? It's also this example that further proves why Tyler Perry's melodrama lacks depth and suspension of disbelief. Sarah's actions also reveal her own flaws and shortcomings as a parent. Despite her best intentions, Sarah's domineering nature further contributes to Judith's feelings of suffocation and inadequacy. For example, Sarah fumbled the ball when she failed to acknowledge her daughter's emotional needs after Judith confronted her about lying about Judith's father's whereabouts. Judith admits that she knows her mother lied to her about her dad being dead, and that the truth was that once Sarah joined the local church, she left him, forcing him out of Judith's life. Of course, Sarah's unwillingness to take responsibility for her actions further strained her relationship with her daughter. Instead of owning up to her mistakes and shortcomings, Sarah resorts to gaslighting Judith, telling her that it wasn't about her, but about Judith being wrong for sleeping with Harley. This demonstrates why Judith had a hard time gaining agency and autonomy in her life. Now let's briefly talk about Brandy's character Melinda, also known as Karen. Melinda's narrative arc introduces themes of trauma and redemption, purportedly adding depth to the film. Portrayed as Harley's ex-girlfriend, Melinda's role seemingly offers insight into the cyclical nature of toxic relationships. Throughout the movie, Melinda's experiences with abuse and betrayal are intermittently highlighted, particularly in her interactions with Bryce. However, these instances are presented in a fragmented manner, lacking substantial exploration or resolution. For instance, Melinda's palpable fear and tension when returning home, armed with a baseball bat, hinted at her constant vigilance against the threat of Harley's return. Yet, the tension remains underdeveloped, failing to delve into the psychological repercussions of her trauma. The film attempts to convey Harley's lingering presence in Melinda's life through subtle moments, such as his unexpected appearance at the pharmacy where Melinda works. And while these instances add a layer of suspense, they ultimately feel superficial, lacking in-depth examination or narrative impact. Essentially, Melinda's character is underutilized, serving primarily as a narrative device to propel Judith's storyline forward. Despite the potential for her experiences to shed light on the complexities of abusive relationships, Melinda's arc remains secondary and underexplored. Now let's get into the acting and directing. The acting performances play a crucial role in shaping the viewer's experience. While some actors manage to elevate their characters with depth and authenticity, the film's overall execution falls short in fully realizing its potential. Jurnee Smollett delivers a compelling portrayal of Judith, capturing the character's vulnerability and emotional turmoil with sincerity. Despite the limitations of the script and direction, Smollett infuses Judith in a sense of complexity, drawing the audience into her inner conflict. Robbie Jones effectively embodies the enigmatic character of Harley, adding a layer of intrigue and danger to the narrative. However, as the plot progresses, Jones' performance veers towards melodrama, detracting from the character's depth and believability. Lance Gross's portrayal of Bryce, while competent, suffers from underdevelopment and lack of nuance. Despite moments of sincerity, Gross's performance is hampered by Perry's direction, which prioritizes spectacle over subtlety. Moreover, Tyler Perry's directing choices contribute to the film's uneven pacing and a lack of depth in character development. While Perry succeeds in creating moments of tension and emotion, his reliance on melodrama undermines the authenticity of the performances and detracts from the film's impact. Perhaps the most disappointing part about the entire movie was the fact that Judith's character arc did not change in the end. Instead of evolving in a way that still gave her room for growth and success, she ended up right back where she started, but this time without being married. And although I think she dodged a bullet with both Bryce and Harley, I didn't think it was necessary for her to end up like a middle-aged church-going hermit whose only best friend is still her mother. The fact that Judith couldn't have been given grace to have her own story of resilience like Bryce, who, by the way, got everything he wanted in the end, despite holding just as much responsibility in their marriage's downfall, is why this movie will always be one of the worst movies I've ever seen. One bad decision in your life shouldn't withhold you from ever going after anything you want again, such as the case with Judith. Her problem wasn't in just what she did, but also how she did it. Leaving her marriage, finding an investor for her business, and quitting her job could have been seen as admirable and brave if she had a confidant to help navigate those circumstances, with her ultimately leading to her making better choices. Essentially, Judith needed to seek therapy for herself to learn boundaries, balance, and healing before becoming a therapist to someone else. Because the truth is, she didn't need to go back to her old self to learn the lessons she needed to. She just needed a higher sense of self-worth and self-confidence to help her become the best version of herself, whatever that looked like. Overall, the film finds its strength in character performances, but weaknesses in plot development, character development, and thematic execution. While the movie attempts to address complex themes, it ultimately falls short, offering an overly simplistic and judgmental portrayal of Judith, her motivations, and the consequences of her actions. It's worth noting that since this film is adapted from his stage play, the values and messages that it tries to uphold are rooted in Christian values, which Tyler's core audience was at the time. However, since it presented itself as the film to stray away from his usual family-friendly content, it should have delivered on that promise instead of trying to stay within the safety net of its predecessor. As we come to the end of unraveling the complexities of Temptation Confessions of a Marriage Counselor, one thing becomes abundantly clear. Tyler Perry's storytelling is a consistent labyrinth of jarring emotions and moral dilemmas, much like the twisted tale of his latest concoction. Picture this. A criminal defense attorney finds herself entangled in a web of chaos, torn between family, duty, and her own scandalous desires as she defends an artist accused of murder. In a world where the line between justice and comedy blurs, every decision has its punchline. But don't take my word for it. Click the video here to see for yourself.